Day 1341 of the Ukrainian War Map, also known as the Russo-Ukrainian War. Juzzie here, and today is another update as I take a simplified and down-to-earth approach to some of the most important happenings on the ground in Ukraine. So starting off, we'll take a look at those Russian losses, as currently Russia sits on more than 1,136,000 military personnel losses, representing an additional 900 in the past day. Then as for hardware, 4 tanks, 8 APVs and 15 artillery, with a different style graphic to show for today. Now to the Russian war map, and a fair enough title for this series of videos, with the latest as Russia started the morning with a series of aerial incursions, including in Krasnodar, Ryazan, Volgograd, and, for example, Tula, where more than 10 powerful blasts rocked the Russian region overnight. Local channels reported bright flashes near the main airport, with residents commenting that they were jolted awake by the sounds, with defenses activated, and one such example caught on camera. Local authorities claimed all inbound UAVs were neutralized, though secondary detonations suggest multiple impacts. Now, Tula is positioned directly south of Moscow, which the Kremlin would no doubt consider prime positioning for air defense installations, which goes some way to complement the Moscow air defense ring of 2025 paranoia, with most of these installations seen here clearly set up facing south toward Ukraine. Oh, then also to briefly mention for Moscow, a wild street fight erupted yesterday in the southwestern suburbs, where dozens of migrant construction workers, armed with shovels, sticks, iron bars, and even ripped up road signs, had raged against the machine. Now, this isn't just some random street drama. Russia's been leaning hard on migrant labor from places like Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, and others to keep its construction and war machine humming, especially with so many able-bodied locals shipped off to the front lines in Ukraine. Tensions are sky high, migrants face crackdowns and exploitation, partially as a means for continued SMO momentum. Then on the map, and to a different type of crowd gathering, where hundreds of young Russians gathered yesterday in central St. Petersburg to sing a banned protest song by exiled Russian musician called Noise MC, a pro-Ukrainian artist now living in Lithuania. The crowd scene here joined street musicians to perform a song titled Cooperative Swan Lake, which is a song that calls for Vladimir Putin's removal and was outlawed in May this year after a local court deemed it extremist. The title references Swan Lake by Tchaikovsky, which famously aired on Soviet TV on repeat just prior to the fall of the Soviet Union. Swan Lake has since become a symbol of Russia's next impending collapse, something that the old empire should be getting quite used to by this point. Then on the map, and beyond the large population centers, all the way over to Yekaterinburg, where a deepening fuel crisis can be seen, with locals complaining to media that they are driving in circles looking for A95 gasoline, all as part of this newly unfolding dynamic. But what makes this occasion most unique is that complaints especially extend to no option to fill up at Gazprom, Lukoil, and Rosneft stations, because fuel depots are empty. These Russian energy behemoths have been less affected over the past 2 months of shortages, due to them being the outfits that hold the reserves, with a bit more wiggle room as opposed to independent gas stations. But now, even they're running dry. A sign the crisis is biting into the core supply chain, not just the fringes. Now to the main map and official new updates to show, with Kusherev Yar in the North Dograpilla sector liberated by Ukrainian forces, which is a follow-up from the end of last week's reporting. The same can be seen for liberated Shakova to the southwest, and a wider chunk of that at almost 15 square kilometers. A few operations also smashed into Russian Fedorivka positions, forcing it into a grey zone, and then also with further pushing back of Russian forces at Nikhinorivka. The Russian army did marginally advance in the direction of Volodymyrivka to the east, likely resulting from their notably heavy pushback from the west. forcing a reconsolidation in positions. So this all leads to, now, a newly bisected front, turning the Russian positions between Shkova and Novoshakhova into the new Kusherev Yar, with the clock ticking. And so, coming out of all of these latest map updates, we saw a string of pivotal events unfolding across the axis. To the Western Front, Ukraine's 47th Mechanized Brigade rejoined combat, capturing multiple Russian soldiers and reasserting control over the sector after months of refit. South of there, the 33rd Brigade halted a Russian armor push near Volodymyrivka, destroying several vehicles mired in mud. Then around Pankivka, repeated Russian mechanized assaults collapsed under Ukrainian FPV drone and artillery strikes, with at least a dozen armored vehicles destroyed or sunk. So the pattern over the past 2 to 3 days reflects precise Ukrainian counterwork, which is unit gains combining terrain advantage and drone warfare to blunt every Russian advance along the Dobrapilla front. Then to the adjacent Pokrovsk front, where the battle has shifted from maneuver to endurance, as Russian forces continue frontal assaults from the south, relying on massed infantry waves against entrenched Ukrainian positions. The city now functions less as terrain and more as a test of attrition, with Pokrovsk having become the psychological hinge of the Donetsk campaign, where sustaining pressure in some cases may matter more than taking ground. Ultimately, the Kremlin concern here is that whoever holds longer shapes winter's storyline of success or defeat. And on that note, Russia has so far captured 2 or 3 Bakhmuts during this latest long-standing phase of their SMO. This includes Avdiivka, Vuhledar, and of course, Bakhmut itself, with each occasion costing the Russian forces on average 100,000 soldiers, roughly speaking, a little bit more. So following all of that, take Pokrovsk for instance right now, a major Russian push in Donetsk that began in earnest in July of last year, 2024, with total casualties for their operations in this direction amounting to approximately 150 to 200,000, being a cumulative figure that includes eliminated, wounded, missing, and captured. So this figure is roughly twice their losses in Avdiivka, and probably about 70% less equipped, deploying troops with almost no tank reserves for the first time, relying on motorcycles and storage relics, all for a town they haven't even taken yet, and taking them about 60% longer to achieve if they were to, say, take the town tomorrow. Beyond all that, there are literally hundreds more Bakhmuts just like it to the central west, north, and south, very much under Russian ambitions. But nothing about this current path or trajectory speaks to sustainability in invader operations. Nonetheless, their attritional meat grinder tactics remain in play, with zero consideration on the Kremlin's part, so far, to stop. There's a couple of news pieces that speak directly to this that I'll follow up with shortly as well. Then, speaking of sustainability, or at least the word, the latest in Russia's warpath is shown to include wind turbines, as Russian troops hit these sites in Kramatorsk for the 3rd time in a week. They were struck by UAVs, suggesting either intent or insufficiently trained operators, either of which generally not a good look. Then headed up the map, as Ukrainian troops from the 425th Separate Assault Regiment, supported by the 63rd Mechanized Brigade, have retaken the village of Torsk in the Donetsk region, and are conducting a mop-up operation overnight fighting. Footage shows Russian soldiers captured as Ukrainian forces cleared remaining positions. The advance, though local, breaks months of standoff in the Lerman direction and pressures nearby Russian lines, marking a small but symbolically significant shift in an otherwise static sector of the Donetsk front. Now to Kherson, where Russian bloggers have been claiming operations in the Kherson North Bank that led to land captures over the past week, though with no credible sources to indicate this. In fact, their actual launching pad or claimed forward operating base is at one of the widest points of the Dnieper River on this end of the map, which also happens to be an area that is largely grey zoned, due to their difficulty in holding those positions for quite some time now. Now, on the hypothetical that Russia takes, say, this micro-district of Korabel, southwest of the city of Kherson, as per their own indications, just take a glance at the map and you'll find this is an almost insurmountable challenge in capturing this land. After all, it was the Russian army who couldn't even retain control of 4,500 square kilometers of land just north, everything indicated in Ukrainian liberated green here, and a much more sustainable forward operating base. It all comes down to supporting an army, so when you zoom back in here, it's clear to see which army can support maintaining control over this micro-district much more easily. Ultimately, these Russian posts are manufactured morale boosters for an army that is in dire need of that boost. Then to take a quick look around the map, a Russian T-62 tank shown by a Russian soldier after it took on significant damage from inbound FPVs. I'm guessing the attack wasn't close to the front line, and they decided to tow it back. Now, taking a visual assessment here, severe burns and fragmentation damage on the turret, hatches and sights are visibly warped, sprockets detached, suspension arms are hanging, the left track assembly is gone, and the engine is likely toast. Not exactly the most salvageable of tanks beyond scrap metal and the odd cannibalized spare parts, in attempt to keep another old T-62 tank in the game. And we're all still asking ourselves the question, where are the T-14 Armatas? Then also, coming from the weekend, Ukrainian military personnel from the 15th Separate Artillery Reconnaissance Brigade, Black Forest, struck a Russian Buk M3 air defense system using a kamikaze drone, putting it out of service, occurring somewhere in the Donetsk region. But where things really heated up is with this next instance, as a Russian BMP loaded with ammunition detonates as a result of incoming FPV fire. Certainly a carried landmine or two popped off from the inside. In fact, BMPs with weak armor and volatile internal stores used to pop off regularly. But today, these days, that's indeed much more rare, as the best of the Kremlin's Soviet-era war chest kit has been largely spent, with the rest now coming in dribs and drabs. Now to the news, and starting off with Kirill Dmitriev, CEO of the Russian Direct Investment Fund and Special Presidential Envoy for Economic Cooperation, who has landed in the United States and is using his visit to advance a Kremlin-anchored narrative that Moscow's maximalist demands in the war in Ukraine remain unchanged, even as Ukraine winds back its negotiating posture. That is to say, not giving away much at all. Now, Dmitriev pressed a message of continuity in Russia's stance while courting the business and political circles of the Donald Trump-era US administration. He also stated that sanctions announced by the US on October 22nd against Russia's two largest oil companies, Rosneft and Lukoil, will not have a significant impact, quote-unquote, on the Russian economy. Echoing old Kremlin talking points, projecting strength over weakness, of course. At the same time, Dmitriev reaffirmed Russia's core conditions. Ukraine must accept neutrality and cede control of what Moscow describes as territories with Russian populations, and that Russia's demands from 2022 remains in place. In effect, Moscow is trying to use Dmitriev's visit to shift the US information space, portraying itself as open to peace talks while maintaining the very conditions that have stalled a resolution for years. Then to a quick Russian military mobilization blunder segment, you know the ones. Here we go. This is Sergei, a 19-year-old Russian conscript, posting a video stating that he refuses to fight in Ukraine and warns that any contract signed by him would be coerced. That's exactly right, Sergei. I've been on this bandwagon for so long because it's rather obvious given all the previous young training conscripts seen in this war, engaged in fighting against Russia's very own laws on the matter. All while Putin has repeatedly claimed there are no conscripts fighting for Russia in Ukraine. And Sergei is not alone, with many more stories including Russian conscript Andrei Smirnov, serving in the 50th Separate Railway Brigade, who recorded a video declaring he refuses to sign a military contract. He says any signed document would be fraudulent and coerced, and saying this right after a ruble payment appeared in his account, and where commanders claimed he'd already signed. So reports of fake contracts, intimidation, and forced signings are growing as Russia struggles to meet recruitment targets in an environment where conscripts are among the easiest and most ready-baked citizens within the country to draw from. Then headed across to a super quick funny to round off the video, with Russian military engineers testing anti-drone defenses at a Rostov training ground. Spoiler, the test FPV drones said, Nice try, comrades. Didn't work out too well. And the fact that they're testing these methods on civilian Buhanka vans suggests an overall change in direction that the Russian army is headed in, and been headed in for quite some time now. One without heavy armor. I'm starting to almost feel sorry for these Buhanka loafs now. So that's it for today, guys. Thanks again for watching. Please continue to like, comment, subscribe. Thanks once again for all of the support, and I do hope to see all of you guys there in the next one. Cheers!